I turned 25 last Tuesday without a single call from my family. Instead, I received an email from my late grandfather's lawyer. For decades, my parents claimed I was a charity case while they lived in luxury. But yesterday, I opened a sealed emerald envelope that changed everything. The $15 million mansion they flaunt never belonged to them. If you have ever felt invisible, listen closely. Sometimes, the best revenge is just a legal signature. My name is Clarissa Pembroke. I live in a fourth-floor walk-up in the shadowed part of Providence, about 40 minutes from the gilded coastline of Newport where I was raised. My apartment is a study in beige and gray, smelling perpetually of my neighbor's boiled cabbage and the metallic tang of the radiator that hisses but never quite warms the room. The paint near the ceiling is peeling in long, translucent strips, like dead skin after a bad sunburn. I pay $1,200 a month for the privilege of existing here, a sum I scrape together from my salary and the side commissions I take on in secret. It is a far cry from the cliffside, the $15 million estate where my parents, Richard and Victoria Pembroke, currently reside. But this space, with its dripping faucet and drafty windows, has one redeeming quality. It is mine, and in here, I do not have to apologize for taking up space. For 25 years, I have lived with the understanding that my very existence was a debt that could never be fully repaid. The story was told to me so many times that it became the foundational myth of my life, a scripture of shame I recited every time I looked in the mirror. They sat me down when I was 5 years old, on a stiff velvet chair in the library that my legs were too short to dangle from properly. My mother, Victoria, looked at me with a pained expression, as if looking at me caused her a physical migraine. My father, Richard, stood by the window, refusing to make eye contact. They told me about Aunt Sarah. Sarah was a cousin. They said, a distant, troubled relative who had fallen into the dark, grimy world of narcotics and bad men. They told me she had died in a squalid motel room, leaving behind nothing but a mountain of debt and a screaming, unwanted infant, me. They told me that, by all rights, I should have gone into the foster system. I should have been lost to the bureaucracy of the state. But they, in their infinite benevolence, had stepped in. They had adopted me, not on paper, but in spirit and practice, giving me the Pembroke name to shield me from the stigma of my illegitimacy. I was the daughter of their charity, not their blood. We saved you from the gutter, Clarissa, my mother would say whenever I asked for something that exceeded the bare minimum. Never forget that. I never did. The distinction between a daughter and a charity case was drawn in invisible but electrified lines throughout the house. My younger sister, Julianne, who was born 2 years after me, was the golden child. She was the rightful heir, the blood of their blood. Julianne went to St. Margaret's, the premier private school where the tuition cost more than most people earned in a year. I went to the local public high school, catching the yellow bus at the end of the long driveway while Julianne was chauffeured in a black sedan. When Julianne turned 16, there was a party that blocked off 3 streets. She received a convertible Mercedes with a giant red bow on the hood. When I turned 16, I received a bus schedule and a lecture on responsibility. It is for your own good, my father had said, not looking up from his Wall Street Journal. Bad blood has a way of resurfacing if it is not tempered with discipline. We do not want you ending up like your mother. That was the constant refrain. Like your mother. Those 3 words governed my life. If I laughed too loud, I was being hysterical like Sarah. If I wanted to sleep in on a Saturday, I was lazy like Sarah. If I showed any interest in boys, I was promiscuous like Sarah. I spent my entire adolescence shrinking, trying to scrub away a stain that was woven into my DNA. I did the chores that the housekeeping staff did not get to. I polished the silver until my fingers smelled of tarnish. I ironed Julianne's silk blouses. I was the live-in Cinderella, minus the fairy godmother and the glass slipper. There is one memory from that time that still wakes me up at night, breathless and cold. I was 16, the same year Julianne got her car. I had been sent to the attic to find a specific set of holiday linens my mother wanted. The attic was dusty and smelled of cedar and old memories. While shifting a heavy trunk, I knocked over a small wooden box tucked behind a dress form. It shattered, spilling its contents across the floorboards. Among the buttons and loose change, something glittered. It was a locket, a delicate, heart-shaped gold locket on a thin chain. I picked it up, my fingers trembling. On the back, engraved in elegant script, was the letter C. My heart hammered against my ribs. C for Clarissa. Was this hers? Was this Sarah's? Was this the one token of love she had left for me, for the first time in my life? I felt a connection to the woman who had abandoned me. I felt a surge of warmth, a phantom hug from a ghost. I clasped the chain around my neck, feeling the cool metal against my skin. I walked to the dusty mirror in the corner and stared at myself. For a second, I did not look like the poor relation. I looked like someone who belonged. "What do you think you are doing?" The voice cracked through the silence like a whip. I spun around. Victoria was standing at the top of the stairs, her face twisted in a mask of pure revulsion. She did not look angry. She looked disgusted. She crossed the room in 3 long strides, her heels clicking violently against the wood. Before I could speak, before I could explain, her hand shot out. She did not unclasp it. She ripped it. I felt the chain snap, the metal burning a friction line into the back of my neck. I gasped, clutching my throat. My mother held the broken locket in her fist, her knuckles white. "You thief," she hissed. "You ungrateful little thief." "I found it," I stammered, tears stinging my eyes. "It has a C. I thought it was hers." "Hers," Victoria laughed, a sharp, barking sound devoid of humor. "You think that drug addict had gold to leave you? She left you nothing but shame. Clarissa, this locket is an antique. It belonged to my grandmother. It is worth more than your entire existence." She walked to the attic window, opened it, and without a second of hesitation, hurled the gold chain into the overgrown ivy below. "Filth," she muttered, wiping her hands on her skirt as if I had contaminated her. "Do not ever touch the family heirlooms again. You are lucky we let you live in this house. Do not push your luck." I spent the next 3 hours in the ivy, searching on my hands and knees in the mud, but I never found it. That night, I scrubbed my skin in the shower until it was raw and red, trying to wash away the Sarah in me. I felt dirty. I felt that no matter how good my grades were, no matter how polite I was fundamentally broken. The only person who ever looked at me without that filter of judgment was my grandfather. Arthur Pembroke. He was a stern man, a titan of industry who had built the family fortune. But when he looked at me, his eyes would soften at the corners. He was the only one who called me Clara, a nickname that felt like a secret between us, but my parents kept him guarded like a state secret. "Grandfather is tired," they would say. "He does not need you bothering him with your chatter. He is confused," they would tell me when he asked for me. "He thinks you are someone else." I remember sneaking into his study once, about a year before he died. He was sitting in his leather armchair, a blanket over his knees, looking frail and translucent. When he saw me, he didn't scold me. He smiled. He reached out a shaking hand and touched my cheek. "You look so much like her," he had whispered. So much like her. I assumed he meant Sarah. I assumed he was seeing the ghost of the niece who had shamed the family. I pulled away, ashamed. "I'm sorry, grandfather," I had whispered. "I'm trying to be better." He had frowned then, a look of confusion crossing his face. But before he could speak, the nurse hired by my mother had bustled in and shooed me out. He died 5 years ago. I was allowed to attend the funeral, but I was placed in the 3rd row, behind the real family. I cried silently, mourning the only person who had ever made me feel, even for a fleeting second, that I was not a mistake. Now, 5 years later, I have built a small, quiet life for myself. I work as a junior restoration specialist at Gilded Horizons, a prestigious art and antique auction house in downtown Newport. My parents think I am a glorified repairman. When I told them I had gotten the job, my father had scoffed. Fitting, he had said, working with other people's cast-offs. They do not understand the work. They do not understand the patience required to take a scalpel to a 17th century canvas, to scrape away centuries of grime and yellowed varnish to reveal the vibrant truth hidden underneath. I love the silence of the studio. I love the smell of the solvents, the turpentine, and the linseed oil. I love the idea that something can be damaged, neglected, and covered in dirt. But with enough care and time, it can be made whole again. In a way, every painting I fix is an act of therapy I cannot afford for myself. I was currently working on a portrait of a merchant from the 1800s. His eyes were dull, obscured by a layer of smoke damage. I was carefully using a cotton swab dipped in a solvent mixture to clean his iris, watching the blue emerge from the gray. When my phone buzzed against the table, the screen lit up. Mother. I stared at the name. My stomach did a familiar somersault. A reflex conditioned by 2 decades of anxiety. We had not spoken in 3 months. Not since I had declined to come over for Sunday brunch because I had to work an extra shift, a refusal that resulted in a barrage of texts about my ingratitude. I took a breath, wiped my hands on my apron, and picked up the phone. Hello, Mother? Clarissa. Her voice was crisp, lacking any preamble or pleasantries. It sounded like the snap of a dry twig. I need you to come to the cliffside this weekend. I hesitated, looking at the calendar on the wall. This weekend. Yes, Saturday. We are hosting the engagement party for Julianne. Todd proposed last night. It is going to be a significant event. The senator is coming, the board of directors, everyone. I felt a cold hollowness expand in my chest. Saturday. Saturday was October 12th. Mother, I said, my voice quiet. Saturday is my birthday. There was a pause on the other end. Not a pause of realization or guilt, but a pause of annoyance. And, she said, we are all adults here. Clarissa, are you really expecting a party at your age? 25 is hardly a milestone worth disrupting the social calendar for. Besides, this is your sister's engagement. It is a family priority. Unless you are saying you do not care about your sister's happiness. The trap was set. It was always this way. If I said no, I was selfish. If I said yes, I was erasing myself. I didn't say that, I replied, the fight draining out of me before it even began. Good, she said, her tone shifting to business. Because we are short-handed, the catering company is sending a B team, and I do not trust them with the vintage wines. I need someone to oversee the service. Make sure the glasses are always full, and frankly, Julianne needs someone to manage her wardrobe changes. She is wearing 3 different dresses. You know how she gets when she is stressed. She wanted me to work, on my 25th birthday, while my younger sister was celebrated as the Princess of Newport. My mother wanted me to come and serve wine to the people who used to look down on me in high school. She wanted me to steam dresses and stand in the shadows, making sure the real family shined. I have work, Mother, I tried. A weak defense. I have a commission due. Do not be ridiculous, she snapped. You can paint your little pictures anytime. We gave you a roof over your head for 18 years. We clothed you. We fed you. We saved you from a life of misery. The least you can do is show up when the family needs you. Do not make me remind you of what you owe us. The debt. Always the debt. I closed my eyes. I imagined hanging up. I imagined throwing the phone into the solvent jar. But the conditioning ran deep. The fear of being completely cut off, of being truly alone in the world without even the crumbs of their affection, was a paralyzing force. Fine, I whispered. I'll be there. Good. Arrive by 10 in the morning. Use the service entrance. Clarissa, the front driveway will be tented for the florists. And your car, well, just park it round the back near the dumpsters so it does not ruin the aesthetic. Goodbye. The line went dead. I lowered the phone and looked back at the merchant in the painting. One of his blue eyes was now bright and clear, staring at me with a piercing intensity. The other was still clouded, gray and lifeless. Happy birthday to me, I whispered to the empty room. I did not know it then, but that phone call was the beginning of the end. I did not know that by agreeing to walk through the service entrance one last time, I was walking toward the match that would burn their entire kingdom to the ground. I picked up my scalpel, my hand trembling slightly, and went back to work. I had 3 days until I had to serve champagne to the people who wished I did not exist. I needed to be ready. The drive to Newport usually felt like crossing a border between two warring nations. As my battered Honda Civic rattled across the bridge, the industrial gray of the mainland gave way to the manicured, impossible green of the island. The air changed here. It smelled less like exhaust and more like money crisp, salty, and exclusive. I turned onto Ocean Drive, the road that hugged the coastline where the Gilded Age mansions stood like fortresses against the Atlantic. The cliffside sat at the very end of a private peninsula, a sprawling limestone beast with turrets and terraces that seemed to grow directly out of the rock. As I approached the main iron gates, security stopped me. A man I did not recognize peered into my window, his nose wrinkling at the sight of my cracked dashboard. "Deliveries are at the rear entrance," he stated flatly, not asking who I was. "I'm family," I said, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "Clarissa Pembroke." He checked a clipboard, frowned, and then finally pressed a button. The gate swung open with a slow, heavy groan. I drove past the main driveway, which was already being lined with white tents and valet stands, and steered my car down the narrow gravel path that led to the servants' quarters and the kitchens. I parked next to the industrial dumpsters, just as my mother had instructed. My car looked like a piece of scrap metal next to the caterer's pristine white vans. I got out, clutching my bag. The ocean wind whipped my hair across my face, stinging my eyes. Even the weather here felt hostile. I entered through the kitchen door, instantly hit by a wall of heat and noise. The kitchen was a chaotic ballet of chefs shouting orders, sous chefs chopping with terrifying speed, and waiters polishing silver. No one looked up as I squeezed past a tray of hors d'oeuvres that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "There you are." My mother did not say hello. She stood by the pantry door, holding a clipboard, looking immaculate in a cream-colored suit that made her look like a statue carved from butter. She did not hug me. She did not wish me a happy birthday. She simply thrust a sheaf of papers into my chest. "You are late," she said, though I was exactly on time. "Here is the run of show. The florists are incompetent. They put the lilies in the foyer instead of the hydrangeas. Fix it. Then check the wine inventory in the cellar. We need 20 cases of the 98 vintage brought up to the bar immediately. And for heaven's sake, do something about your hair. You look like you just walked out of a wind tunnel." I took the list, my fingers brushing against hers. Her skin was cool, dry, and recoiled from my touch. "Hello, Mother," I said quietly. "You look lovely." She ignored the compliment, already turning away to bark an order at a passing waiter. "And Julianne is upstairs having a crisis with the zipper on her second dress. Go help her before she rips it. Run, Clarissa." I walked up the back servants' stairs, the narrow wooden steps creaking under my feet. These were the stairs I had used my entire childhood, so I wouldn't disturb the guests in the main hall. I emerged on the second floor and walked down the plush hallway toward Julianne's suite. The door was open. Julianne stood in the center of the room on a pedestal, surrounded by 3 assistants who were pinning and tucking layers of white silk. She looked breathtaking. Her blonde hair fell in perfect waves, her skin glowed, and on her finger sat a diamond the size of a quail's egg. She was the princess, the heir, the future of the Pembroke dynasty. "Ouch, watch it!" she shrieked, slapping the hand of a seamstress. "You pricked me. Do you want to be sued?" The poor woman mumbled an apology, looking terrified. Julianne caught my reflection in the vanity mirror. Her eyes narrowed. "Oh, look who the cat dragged in," she drawled, not turning around. "The help has arrived." "Hello, Julianne?" I said, stepping into the room. "Mother said you needed help with a zipper." "I need help with everything," she sighed dramatically. hopping off the pedestal. These idiots are useless. And look at you. Is that what you are wearing to my engagement party? A gray cardigan? You look like a librarian who got lost. I looked down at my simple dress and sweater. It was clean, modest, and the nicest thing I owned. I'm working the party, Julianne, I reminded her. I'm not a guest. True, she smirked. Walking over to me, she reached out and flicked the collar of my sweater. At least try to stay in the background. Todd's parents are coming, and they are very particular. I don't want them asking who the frumpy girl is. She turned her back to me. Well, don't just stand there. Steam the veil, and make sure my shoes are polished. The photographer will be here in 20 minutes. I spent the next 4 hours as a ghost. I moved hydrangeas. I carried heavy crates of wine from the cellar until my arms shook. I steamed silk until the room spun. By the time the guests began to arrive, I was exhausted, sweaty, and invisible. The party was a spectacle of excess. The lawn overlooking the ocean was transformed into a dreamscape of white silk tents and crystal chandeliers. A string quartet played Debussy, while waiters circulated with trays of caviar and champagne. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the murmur of polite, wealthy conversation. I stood by the bar, positioned behind a pillar, tasked with ensuring the bartenders didn't overpour the vintage stock. From my vantage point, I watched my family. Richard and Victoria stood at the entrance, greeting guests with dazzling smiles. They looked like royalty. Julianne clung to Todd's arm, laughing that tinkling, practiced laugh that signaled she was having the time of her life. Clarissa. I froze. A group of older women, friends of my mother, had drifted near the bar. One of them, Mrs. Vanderhoven, was peering at me over her rimless glasses. Oh, it is you, she said, her voice dropping a register to a theatrical whisper. We didn't see you on the guest list. Helping out the staff tonight, are we? Yes, Mrs. Vanderhoven, I said, forcing a smile. Just making sure everything runs smoothly for Julianne. She turned to her companions, not bothering to lower her voice. Such a good girl. Considering, you know the story, don't you? The Pembrokes took her in out of pure charity. The mother was, well, let's just say she was a woman of loose morals, died of an overdose in a motel. How tragic, another woman clucked, eyeing me with a mixture of pity and distaste. And yet Victoria treats her like her own, a saint. That woman is, most people would have let the state handle a child with that kind of background. Bad blood. Mrs. Vanderhoven nodded sagely. It's a mercy she turned out as functional as she did, though I hear she just fixes old furniture for a living. Figures. Can't expect much ambition from that gene pool. I gripped the edge of the bar, my knuckles turning white. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them I had a degree in art history, that I restored masterpieces, that I was not a broken thing, but I said nothing. I just signaled a waiter to refill their glasses, swallowing the bile in my throat. Disaster struck an hour later. Julianne was holding court near the chocolate fountain, gesturing wildly as she recounted the story of Todd's proposal. I was passing by with a tray of empty glasses I had cleared from a nearby table. Julianne spun around, her arm flailing out to emphasize a point. Her elbow hit the tray I was holding. Crash! The sound of shattering crystal cut through the music like a gunshot. 5 crystal flutes exploded on the patio stones. Red wine, the expensive vintage I had hauled up, splashed across the hem of Julianne's pristine white dress. The silence that followed was absolute. The quartet stopped playing. Every eye in the garden turned to us. "You idiot!" Julianne screamed, her face contorting into ugly rage. "Look what you did. You ruined my dress." You hit me," I stammered, dropping to my knees to pick up the shards. "You turned around and hit the tray." "I did not," she lied, her voice rising to a shriek. "You clumsy, jealous freak. You did this on purpose. You couldn't stand that today was about me. Could you?" My father was there in seconds. He grabbed my upper arm, his fingers digging into my flesh with bruising force. He hauled me to my feet, away from the guests, his face a mask of cold fury. "Richard, please," I whispered. "It was an accident. She hit me." "Silence," he hissed, his voice low and dangerous. "Do not dare blame your sister for your incompetence. Look at this mess. Look at the scene you have caused. We invite you into our home. We give you a simple task, and you humiliate us." "I didn't—" "Get out of my sight," he spat, shoving me toward the kitchen doors. "Go to the kitchen and stay there. If I see your face out here again tonight, you will regret it." I stumbled back, my eyes burning. I could feel the stares of 100 people burning into my back, the pity, the disgust, the confirmation of everything they had whispered about me, the bad blood, the charity case, the mistake. I fled to the kitchen. The staff ignored me. Used to the tantrums of the rich, I sat on a stool in the far corner, near the dishwashing station. The clock on the wall read 9 in the evening. My birthday was almost over. I saw a tray of rejected desserts on the counter, cupcakes that had been deemed not pretty enough for the tower. I reached out and took one. It was dry and the frosting was smudged. I stuck a single wooden toothpick into the center. "Happy birthday, Clarissa," I whispered to myself. I blew out the invisible flame and ate the cupcake in 2 bites. It tasted like sugar and salt from my own tears. I stayed there until the party began to wind down around midnight. When the coast was clear, I slipped out the back door, desperate to escape the suffocating weight of the house. The cool night air felt like a blessing. I walked to my car, my feet aching, my spirit crushed. I just wanted to go home to my peeling paint and my silence. "Miss Pembroke." I jumped, dropping my keys. A man stepped out of the shadows near the dumpsters. He was tall, dressed in a suit that cost more than my car, and he looked completely out of place next to the garbage bins. He had silver hair and eyes that seemed to catch the moonlight. "I'm sorry," I said, backing away. "I don't have any money. I'm just leaving." "I am not here for money," he said, his voice smooth and deep. He reached into his pocket. I flinched, but he only pulled out a small, cream-colored card. "I have been waiting for you to exit. It is difficult to get a moment alone with you in that house." "Who are you?" "My name is Thaddeus Stone," he said, extending the card to me. "I am the senior partner at Sterling and Stone. I represented your grandfather, Arthur Pembroke." I took the card. The paper was heavy, textured. "My grandfather died 5 years ago," I said, confused. "He did." "Mr. Stone agreed. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't place. It wasn't pity, but something sharper, respect expectation. But he left specific instructions that were to be executed only upon a certain date. "Today is your 25th birthday. Is it not?" "How do you know that—" "Arthur knew," he said enigmatically. "He knew everything. Clarissa, and now it is time for you to know as well." He glanced up at the looming silhouette of the mansion, where the lights were still blazing. "Come to my office on Monday morning at 9 o'clock, he said. "Do not tell your parents. Do not tell anyone. What we have to discuss will change the nature of your reality." "What is this about?" I asked, my heart beginning to race. "It is about inheritance," he said softly. "And it is about the truth." Before I could ask another question, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness as quickly as he had arrived. I stood alone by the dumpsters, clutching the card, while the sound of my sister's laughter floated down from the balcony above, mocking me one last time. But as I looked at the name on the card, Sterling and Stone, I felt a strange shiver run down my spine. The cupcake was gone, the tears were drying, and for the first time all day, I didn't feel like a servant. I felt like someone who was about to wake up. I sat at my kitchen table, the laminate surface peeling at the edges, and stared at the cream-colored business card for what felt like the 1,000th time. It was Sunday night. The remnants of my disastrous birthday hung over me like a physical weight, but the encounter in the parking lot had sparked something else, a memory. It was faint, buried under years of trauma and conditioning, but it was there. I was 7 years old. I had scraped my knee playing in the garden, a garden I wasn't really supposed to play in, because I might ruin the hydrangeas. Grandfather Arthur had found me crying behind the potting shed. He hadn't scolded me. He had cleaned the scrape with his handkerchief and whispered something into my hair while he held me. Patience. Clara, the truth is a slow-growing tree. You must wait until you are 25. Promise me. I had promised, not understanding what I was agreeing to. I had thought he meant I could have a pony when I was 25, or maybe a car. I had never imagined he was talking about my life. That night, sleep was a fugitive. I lay in my narrow bed, listening to the sirens wailing in the distance, my mind replaying the image of Thaddeus Stone's eyes. They held knowledge, dangerous knowledge. Monday morning arrived with a gray, relentless drizzle. I called in sick to Gilded Horizons, something I had never done in 3 years of employment. My hands shook as I dressed, not in my usual work smock, but in a navy blazer I had found at a thrift store. It made me feel armored. The offices of Sterling & Stone were located in a brownstone building in the historic district, a place where the brass door handles were polished to a mirror shine and the air smelled of beeswax and old money. I walked in at 9 o'clock sharp. The receptionist, a woman with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, did not ask me if I had an appointment. She simply looked up, saw my face, and stood up. "Miss Pembroke," she said. Her tone was not dismissive, it was deferential. "Mr. Stone is expecting you in the main library." She led me down a corridor lined with oil paintings of men who looked like they had signed the Declaration of Independence. We stopped at a set of double mahogany doors. She knocked once, then opened them. Thaddeus Stone stood by a fireplace, though no fire was burning. The room was cavernous, lined floor to ceiling with books that looked like they hadn't been touched in a century. On the massive oak desk in the center of the room sat a single object, a steel box, heavy, gray, and scarred with age. "Please, sit down, Clarissa." "Mr. Stone said, gesturing to a leather chair that swallowed my small frame. He didn't sit behind the desk. He pulled a chair around to face me, eliminating the barrier between us. "Coffee water." "No," I said, my voice sounding thin in the large room. "I just want to know what is going on. You said my grandfather left instructions." "Arthur was a man of great foresight," Stone said, folding his hands. "He watched what was happening in that house. He saw how Richard and Victoria treated you. He saw the separation, the cruelty, the narrative they spun about your origins. They treated me that way because of who I am," I said, reciting the script I had been taught. "Because I am the daughter of Sarah. Because I am a mistake." Stone's eyes hardened. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, intricate key. "Sarah." He repeated the name, tasting it like spoiled milk. "Yes, the tragic cousin Sarah. The addict, the black sheep. That is the story. Is it not?" "It is the truth," I whispered. "Open the box, Clarissa." He pushed the steel container toward me. I hesitated. It felt cold to the touch. I took the key he offered, my fingers trembling so badly I had to use both hands to guide it into the lock. It turned with a heavy, satisfying thunk. I lifted the lid. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and lavender, my grandfather's cologne. There were 3 distinct bundles, a thick legal document bound in blue ribbon, a leather-bound journal, and a manila envelope stamped with the seal of a hospital in Boston. "Start with the envelope," Stone commanded gently. I picked it up. The seal was already broken. I slid the contents out. It was a birth certificate. The original, issued by Massachusetts General Hospital. I scanned the document, my eyes blurring. I was looking for the name Sarah Pembroke. I was looking for the proof of my shame, the legal documentation of my abandonment. Name of child: Clarissa Ann Pembroke. Date of birth: October 12th, 2000. Time of birth: 2:14 in the morning. My eyes dropped to the line below. Parents: mother's name: Victoria Elizabeth Pembroke. Father's name: Richard James Pembroke. I stared at the words. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. I blinked, sure that I had misread them, sure that my mind was projecting what I wanted to see rather than what was there, but the ink remained black and resolute. "I don't understand," I said, my voice trembling. This says Victoria is my mother. My birth mother." "Keep reading," Stone said. "Look at the medical discharge papers stapled to the back." I flipped the page. It was a discharge summary for Victoria Pembroke. "Admitted for labor and delivery. Patient delivered a healthy female infant via natural birth. No complications." "But Aunt Sarah," I stammered, looking up at Stone. "They told me Sarah died. They told me they adopted me." "There was no Aunt Sarah," Stone said. The words hit me like a physical blow to the chest. "Sarah was a fiction, a ghost story invented by two people who cared more about their social standing than their own flesh and blood." "Why?" The word ripped out of my throat, raw and painful. "If I am their daughter, if I am really theirs, why treat me like this? Why lie? Why make me feel like garbage for 25 years? "Read the journal," Stone said, pointing to the leather book in the box. "October, 2000. I opened the book. My grandfather's handwriting was spidery but forceful. The ink pressed deep into the page as if he had been writing in anger. "October 15th, 2000. I have never been more ashamed of my own son. Richard and Victoria have returned from their semester abroad in Europe. They did not go to study art. They went to hide a pregnancy. They were not married when the child was conceived. They were reckless, stupid children playing at being adults. But instead of owning their mistake, instead of standing up and facing the scandal, they chose to bury it. Richard is running for city council next month. He says a bastard child born out of wedlock would destroy his poll numbers. He says the conservative voters in Newport would never accept a candidate with such a moral failing. So they hid her. They hid little Clarissa. They brought her back not as their daughter, but as a ward. They invented this story of a dead cousin to garner sympathy. They want to play the saints. They want the world to see them as benevolent saviors who took in a stray, rather than parents who had a child too soon. I told Richard I would expose him. He threatened to cut me off from the child entirely. He said if I spoke a word, he would send her away to a boarding school in Switzerland and I would never see her again. I am an old man, and I am a coward. I chose to stay silent so I could watch her grow. But I will not let this lie stand forever. I have started the trust today. If I cannot give her her name while I'm alive, I will give her the world when I'm gone." I dropped the journal. It hit the desk with a dull thud. The silence in the room was deafening. I felt like I was falling. All the years of scrubbing floors, the hand-me-down clothes, the separate dinners, the way my mother looked at me with that mixture of disgust and tolerance. It wasn't because I wasn't theirs. It was because I was theirs. I was the living, breathing evidence of their imperfection. Every time they looked at me, they didn't see a daughter. They saw a scandal they had narrowly escaped. I was the stain on their pristine reputation. And Julianne. Julianne came 2 years later, after the wedding, after the rings were on the fingers and the church bells had rung. She was the legitimate heir. She was the perfect product. I was the prototype they wanted to recall. "They lied," I whispered, the tears finally spilling over, hot and fast. "They looked me in the eye for 25 years and told me I was unwanted. They made me thank them for saving me. It was a control mechanism," Stone said, his voice gentle but firm. "By making you feel indebted, by making you feel lesser, they ensured you would never challenge them. They ensured you would stay in the shadows where they wanted you. A grateful servant never asks for her inheritance." "Inheritance," I repeated, wiping my face with my sleeve. "The house, the money, it was never charity." "No," Stone said, "and that brings us to the third document, the trust." He reached into the box and pulled out the thick document bound in blue ribbon. "Your parents believe that your grandfather left the estate to them," Stone explained. "They believe that because they are the guardians of the estate, they own it. But Arthur was very specific. He created an irrevocable trust. Do you know what that means? Clarissa." I shook my head. I knew how to fix a tear in a canvas, how to mix solvents, how to date a piece of porcelain. I knew nothing of law. It means the terms cannot be changed by anyone but the grantor, and the grantor is dead, Stone said. It also means the assets in the trust do not belong to the trustees. Your parents are merely managers. They have been living in the cliffside, driving the cars, and spending the interest, solely because they are the guardians of the beneficiary. He pushed the document toward me. Look at the beneficiary clause. I opened the document. The legal jargon was dense, but the name in bold print was unmistakable. Sole beneficiary, the first biological grandchild of Arthur Pembroke. That is you, Stone said. Not Julianne, you, and there is a stipulation. The trust matures and transfers full ownership and control to the beneficiary upon her 25th birthday. My hand flew to my mouth. Yesterday, I breathed. Yesterday, Stone confirmed. As of midnight last night, Richard and Victoria Pembroke are no longer the masters of the cliffside. They are guests, and you, Clarissa, are the landlord. I sat back in the leather chair, my mind reeling. The implications crashed over me like waves. The way my mother had ordered me to the service entrance, the way my father had shoved me out of the garden. They were standing on my property. They were drinking wine paid for by my trust fund. They were celebrating Julianne's engagement in my house. Do they know? I asked. They know the trust exists, Stone said. But they do not know the terms. Arthur was very careful. He let them believe that the trust would dissolve into their hands when you turned 25, assuming you were compliant. Or perhaps they assumed that since they successfully erased your identity as their daughter, the clause, biological grandchild, would default to Julianne. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. But they forgot one thing. Biology does not care about social narratives, and Arthur kept the medical records. We have the DNA proof. We have the birth certificate. We have everything. A cold fire began to ignite in my stomach. It started small, a flicker of anger, but it grew rapidly, consuming the sadness, consuming the confusion. It replaced the heartbreak with something harder, something sharper. They hadn't just rejected me. They had used me. They had turned me into a servant in my own inheritance to protect a political campaign that ended 20 years ago. They had robbed me of a childhood, of a mother's love, of a father's protection, all because they were too cowardly to admit they had sex before marriage. I looked down at the birth certificate again. Victoria Elizabeth Pembroke, the woman who had thrown my locket into the ivy, the woman who had told me I had bad blood. It was her blood. It was her blood running through my veins. The cruelty was not an accident. It was self-hatred projected onto me. What do? I asked, looking up at Stone. That is up to you, Stone said. You can sign the papers, take control, and evict them tomorrow. You can sue them for back rent. You can expose them to the press. He paused, gauging my reaction. However, he continued, I received a frantic call from your father this morning. He wants to meet with you. He claims he has important papers for you to sign regarding your Aunt Sarah's old debts. I laughed. It was a dry, brittle sound. Debts. There is no Aunt Sarah. Exactly. Stone smiled. A shark-like grin that told me he was enjoying this. He is panicking. He knows the date. He likely wants you to sign a waiver, a document that would trick you into renouncing your claim to the trust before you even know you have one. I stood up. I picked up the birth certificate and the journal. I felt the weight of them in my hands, 25 years of lies compressed into paper. He wants to meet, I asked. Dinner, tonight, at Le Jardin. Stone said, he said it is a celebration, a belated birthday dinner. I thought about the cupcake with the toothpick. I thought about the service entrance. I thought about Julianne on her pedestal. I'll go, I said. My voice was steady now. The trembling had stopped. Are you sure? Stone asked. I can handle this legally. You do not have to face them. No, I said. I need to look them in the eye. I need to see them lie to me one last time. I want to see how far they will go." "Very well," Stone said. He reached into his drawer and pulled out a small recording device. "Take this. Rhode Island is a one-party consent state. Record everything." I took the device and slipped it into my pocket. "Clarissa," Stone said as I turned to the door, "one more thing. You are a Pembroke. A real one. Do not let them make you feel small tonight." I looked back at him. "Mr. Stone, for the first time in my life, I don't feel small. I feel dangerous." I walked out of the office and into the rain, but I didn't feel the cold. I was burning with the realization that the people I had spent my life trying to please were not my saviors. They were my tenants, and their lease had just expired. The emotional shock of seeing my birth certificate had left me breathless. But Thaddeus Stone was not done. He was a man of precision, and he shifted gears from the sentimental to the forensic with terrifying speed. He cleared the desk of the emotional debris, the journal, the hospital records, and spread out a new set of documents. These were not handwritten notes or faded medical charts. These were spreadsheets, tax filings, and corporate ledgers. They looked cold, complex, and undeniable. "Now that you know who you are, Clarissa." "Mr. Stone said, adjusting his glasses. "You need to understand what you own, and more importantly, you need to understand the corner your parents have painted themselves into." He tapped the thick document bound in blue ribbon that he had introduced earlier. "This is an irrevocable living trust. Do you understand the distinction between a standard will and this?" "Not entirely," I admitted. Leaning forward, my tears had dried, replaced by a sharp, focused adrenaline. "A will is a wish list that is executed after death, and it can be contested," Stone explained, his voice taking on the lecture tone of a university professor. "An irrevocable trust is a steel cage. Once Arthur signed this 25 years ago, the assets inside it ceased to belong to him, and they certainly never belonged to your father. The assets belong to the trust entity itself, held for the sole benefit of the beneficiary." He turned a page to a section heavily highlighted in yellow. "Arthur knew his son better than Richard knew himself. Arthur knew that Richard and Victoria were vain, spendthrift, and obsessed with appearances. He knew that if he left them the money directly, it would be squandered within a decade. So, he bypassed them completely." Stone pointed to the breakdown of assets. "Item 1, he read, the residential estate known as the Cliffside, located at 104 Ocean Avenue, Newport. Current market valuation is approximately $15 million. Title is held by the Arthur Pembroke Trust. Item 2, a controlling interest in Pembroke Holdings, which includes a 60% voting share in the family investment firm. This means, effectively, that whoever controls the trust controls the company board. Item 3, liquid assets, stocks, bonds, and cash reserves totaling $20 million, accumulated through compound interest over the last 2.5 decades. I stared at the numbers. $20 million. It was a sum so abstract it felt fake. I had less than $400 in my checking account. I had spent the last week eating instant noodles to save money for car repairs. "And here is the trap," Stone said, a grim smile touching his lips. He flipped to the clause regarding the beneficiary. Arthur wrote that the trust would transfer full ownership to, and I quote, "the first biological grandchild of direct lineage upon the attainment of their 25th birthday." Stone leaned back, clasping his hands behind his head. "This is the genius of your grandfather. He knew about the lie. He knew they were calling you adopted. If you were truly adopted, if their story about Aunt Sarah had been real, you would not be a biological grandchild. In that case, the trust stipulates that all assets would be liquidated and donated to the Red Cross. Your parents would get nothing," I gasped, realizing the mechanism. "So if they stuck to their story legally, they would lose the money." "Precisely. But because you are their biological daughter, you fit the description of the heir. However, Arthur added a condition. The trustees, your parents, were allowed to live in the house and receive a monthly management stipend until the heir came of age. They were essentially highly paid house sitters. They do not own the bricks, the furniture, or the land. They just have the right to occupy it. So they needed me, I said slowly, the pieces falling into place. They needed me to exist to keep the trust active, but they needed to hide who I was to save their reputation. They have been walking a tightrope for 25 years. Stone agreed. They needed you close enough to claim you as a dependent for the trust's maintenance, but distant enough that no one asked why you didn't look like Aunt Sarah. It was a torture of their own making. But why now? I asked. Why is Richard panicking? Why the sudden dinner invitation? Stone pulled a separate folder from his briefcase. It was red. Because. Clarissa, your parents are not just cruel, they are insolvent. He opened the red folder. Inside were credit reports and foreclosure notices. They have been living a billionaire lifestyle on a millionaire's allowance. The stipend Arthur provided was generous, about $30,000 a month. But it was not enough to support Julianne's private schooling, the galas, the new cars every year, and the vacations to Saint-Tropez. They have burned through every cent of their personal income. They have maxed out credit lines based on the expectation of future inheritance. Stone pointed to a terrifying figure in red ink at the bottom of the page. They are currently in debt to the tune of $4 million, and the creditors are calling. They have been holding the wolves at bay by promising that once the trust matures on your 25th birthday, they would sell the cliffside and pay everyone off. But they can't sell it, I said. It's mine. They believe they can, Stone corrected me. They are banking on two things. First, they assume you do not know the terms of the trust. They think you believe their lie about Aunt Sarah. Second, and this is the most important part, they assume that even if you find out, you are too weak, too beaten down, and too desperate for their love to fight them. Stone pulled out a draft document that looked suspiciously like the one I had seen on legal dramas. This is what they will try to get you to sign tonight, he warned. It is a waiver of interest and a quitclaim deed. They will likely frame it as something else. They might say it is paperwork to clear Aunt Sarah's old debts, or perhaps some formality to officially adopt you now that you are an adult, but the legal effect will be to transfer your beneficiary rights to the next in line. Julianne, I whispered. Exactly. If you sign that paper, you renounce your claim. Since Julianne is the second biological grandchild, the trust would default to her. And since Julianne is under their thumb, they would force her to liquidate the assets immediately. They would sell your house, pay their debts, and keep the remaining millions, leaving you with nothing. I felt a wave of nausea, followed by a surge of heat that started in my chest and radiated out to my fingertips. It was anger, pure and distilled. They weren't just content with abusing me for a quarter of a century. They wanted to steal my future to pay for the luxury they had denied me. They wanted to sell the roof over my head, my roof to pay for Julianne's wedding and their own mistakes. They are planning to sell the cliffside, I said, my voice hardening. My grandfather's home. They have already listed it quietly with a private broker. Stone revealed. They have an offer on the table from a tech mogul in California. $22 million. They are just waiting for your signature to close the deal. They need to show clear title, and they can't do that while you are the beneficiary. I stood up and walked to the window of the library. Outside, the rain was lashing against the glass, distorting the world into gray smears. I looked at my reflection. I didn't see the scared girl who used to hide in the attic anymore. I saw the owner of a $15 million fortress. I saw the CEO of a family empire. They think I am stupid, I said to the glass. They think you are conditioned, Stone said from behind me. They think 25 years of psychological warfare has made you compliant. They do not realize that pressure does not just break things. It also creates diamonds. I turned back to him. What happens if I don't sign? Then the trust executes as written, Stone said. You take immediate possession of all assets. The stipend to your parents stops instantly, and since they have no lease agreement with you, they become squatters in your home. You can evict them. You can fire them from the company board. You can strip them of everything they have used to hurt you. And the debt? I asked. The debt is personal to Richard and Victoria. It is not attached to the trust assets. If they cannot sell the house, they cannot pay their creditors, they will be forced into personal bankruptcy. They will lose everything they actually own, which, according to my research, is mostly clothes and jewelry. I walked back to the desk and ran my hand over the leather journal. My grandfather had left me a weapon. He had buried it deep, waiting for the day I would be strong enough to wield it. I am going to that dinner, I said, my voice steady. I want to see the paperwork. I want to see them try to sell me down the river for $4 million. Be careful, Clarissa, Stone warned, his expression grave. When a narcissist is cornered, they become dangerous. Do not sign anything. Do not agree to anything. Just listen, record, and leave. I won't sign, I promised. But I need one thing from you. Name it. I need you to prepare the eviction notices, I said. I want them ready. I want them dated for tomorrow. Stone smiled. And this time, it was a genuine smile of approval. I already have them drafted. Miss Pembroke, I was just waiting for your command. I checked the time. It was 4 p.m. My father had made the reservation for 7. I had 3 hours to prepare. I had 3 hours to transform from the unwanted orphan into the executioner of their legacy. I have to go, I said, gathering my purse. I have to get ready. Clarissa, Stone called out as I reached the door. I turned. Remember, tonight isn't a negotiation. It is an ambush. Make sure you are the one springing the trap. Don't worry, Mr. Stone, I said, touching the recording device in my pocket. I'm not bringing a knife to a gunfight. I'm bringing the law. I walked out of the office with the rhythm of war drums in my head. The fear was gone. In its place was a cold, calculating clarity. They wanted to talk about debts. Fine. We would talk about debts, but we would not be talking about money. We would be talking about 25 years of stolen time. And tonight, I was coming to collect the following Tuesday. I returned to Gilded Horizons as if nothing had changed. I sat at my workbench, the smell of turpentine and old varnish filling my nose, and meticulously removed layers of grime from the 19th century merchant's portrait. My hands were steady, but my mind was operating on a different frequency entirely, while my colleagues chatted about their weekend plans and the weather. I was silently compiling a forensic accounting of my parents' destruction. It was not difficult to find the evidence. My family lived their lives in the public eye, documenting every excess for the adoration of their social circle. I spent my lunch break scrolling through the Newport Socialite Instagram feed and my mother's Facebook page. There it was, a digital trail of breadcrumbs leading straight to their bankruptcy. The trip to the Maldives last winter, where they had rented a private island villa, the new Range Rover sitting in the driveway, purchased just 3 months ago. The charity gala where my father had bid $50,000 on a trip to Tuscany just to outshine his business rival, Bob Sterling. They were bleeding money. They were hemorrhaging the trust fund that they had no right to touch, spending the principal under the assumption that the well would never run dry. Every photo of Julianne holding a designer bag or sipping champagne on a yacht was not just a display of wealth, it was a theft. They were stealing from me to fund the very lifestyle they used to exclude me. My phone buzzed at 3 p.m. I stared at the screen. Father. I let it ring 3 times before picking up. I needed to compose myself. I needed to make sure my voice sounded like the obedient, grateful daughter they had constructed. Hello, Father, I answered, keeping my tone light. Clarissa. His voice flowed through the speaker, warm and rich like melted caramel. It was a voice I had heard him use 1,000 times with clients and donors, but almost never with me. How is my hardworking girl today? The affection was so performative it almost made me gag. I gripped the edge of my workbench. I am fine, Father, just working. Good, good. You know, your mother and I were talking last night. We felt terrible about how the party ended on Saturday, truly terrible. It was a chaotic night, and emotions were high, but we should not have let your birthday pass without a proper celebration. It's okay, I lied. I know Julianne's engagement is the priority. Nonsense, he said, the word dripping with false magnanimity. You are part of this family too. Clarissa, we want to make it up to you. Join us for dinner tonight, just the three of us. Julianne is out with Todd, so we can have some quiet family time. I managed to get a table at Le Jardin. Le Jardin, the most exclusive French restaurant in Newport. A place where a salad cost more than my weekly grocery budget. My father was pulling out all the stops. That sounds very generous, I said. Catching my reflection in the mirror on the wall, my eyes looked cold. What time? 7 o'clock, and Clarissa dressed nicely. We want to show you off. I hung up and immediately touched the small recorder in my pocket. The trap was set. They were not taking me to dinner to celebrate my birth. They were taking me to dinner to erase my future. I arrived at Le Jardin at exactly 7. The restaurant was a sanctuary of hushed tones, white tablecloths, and the soft clinking of silver against china. My parents were already seated at a corner booth. Bathed in the warm glow of a crystal chandelier, they looked the picture of elegance. My father was wearing a charcoal suit that fit him perfectly, and my mother was draped in a silk shawl, her pearls gleaming against her neck. When they saw me, they stood up. This, in itself, was a shock. They never stood for me. Clarissa. My mother reached out and hugged me. It was a stiff, perfumed embrace, but for a split second, the scent of her Chanel No. 5 triggered a primal, childish longing in my chest. I wanted to melt into her. I wanted to believe that this was real. But then I felt the cold metal of her diamond bracelet pressing against my spine, reminding me of the wealth that stood between us. You look tired. Darling, she said, pulling back and scanning my face with a critical eye. Are you eating enough? You look so pale. I am fine. Mother, I said, sliding into the booth. Just working hard. Well, tonight you relax, my father said, signaling the sommelier. Tonight, we celebrate you. The first hour was a masterclass in gaslighting. They asked about my job, feigning interest in the restoration process. They laughed at my small jokes. They reminisced about my childhood, carefully editing out the neglect and the cruelty. They talked about that time we took you to the zoo, but conveniently forgot that they had left me with the nanny while they took Julianne to the petting enclosure. I played my part. I smiled. I nodded. I ate the lobster bisque that tasted like cream and betrayal. I let them think their charm offensive was working. By the time the espresso arrived, the atmosphere shifted. My father cleared his throat, the signal that the performance was over and the business was about to begin. He reached under the table and pulled out a leather portfolio. Clarissa, he began, his voice dropping to a serious, confidential register. There is actually another reason we wanted to see you tonight. Something important. Oh, I asked, sipping my water to hide the dryness in my mouth. It is about your background, my mother interjected, her face twisting into a mask of pained concern. She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. Her palm was clammy. You know we have always tried to protect you from the ugly truth of your origins. We wanted you to have a normal life, free from the shadows of the past. But unfortunately, my father continued, opening the portfolio, the past has a way of catching up. We received some troubling news from our lawyers this week. It seems that your biological mother, Sarah, left behind more than just memories. She left behind significant debts. I watched them weave the lie. It was impressive in its audacity. Debts, I asked, widening my eyes innocently. Gambling debts, loans from unsavory people, my father said, shaking his head gravely. And because you are her biological daughter, these creditors are starting to sniff around. They are looking for assets attached to her bloodline. He slid a document across the pristine tablecloth. It was thick, stapled, and topped with a cover sheet that read, Family Asset Protection Liability Release Agreement. We cannot let them ruin your life, Clarissa, my mother said, squeezing my hand tighter. We cannot let them garnish your wages or come after your future. So, Your father and I had our legal team draw this up. It is a protective measure." "What does it do?" I asked, not touching the paper yet. "It effectively separates your legal identity from any claims against the Sarah Pembroke estate." My father explained smoothly. "It states that you renounce any financial entanglement with the past, and in exchange, the main family estate, our estate, absorbs the liability risk. We are taking the bullet for you, sweetheart. We are shielding you." I looked down at the document. I flipped the cover page. The legal jargon was dense, designed to confuse, but thanks to Thaddeus Stone, I knew exactly what I was looking for. And there it was, buried on page 4, paragraph 3. "The undersigned hereby waives any and all beneficial interest in the Arthur Pembroke Irrevocable Trust, dated March 15th, 2000, and quitclaims all rights to real property located at 104 Ocean Avenue. It wasn't a shield, it was a surrender. They were asking me to sign away $15 million and my identity to protect myself from a woman who never existed." "You would do that for me?" I asked, looking up at them. My voice trembled, and I didn't have to fake it. I was shaking with rage. "You would take on the risk for me?" "Of course we would," my mother said, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "We are your parents. Clarissa, we love you. We promised to take care of you when we took you in, and we are not going to stop now. All you have to do is sign here, and we can handle the lawyers. You won't have to worry about a thing." For a singular, terrifying moment, I felt the pull. The narrative was so seductive. Here were my parents, finally looking at me with love, finally offering to protect me. The little girl inside me, the one who had waited 25 years for a hug, wanted to pick up the pen. She wanted to believe that they were saving her from the bad men. She wanted to buy their love with her signature. But then, the image of the birth certificate flashed in my mind. Mother Victoria Elizabeth Pembroke. There was no Aunt Sarah. There were no gambling debts. There were no unsavory creditors. There were only two people sitting across from me, eating creme brulee, trying to trick their own daughter into poverty so they could keep their yacht. The love in their eyes was not love. It was greed. They were looking at me and seeing a transaction. They were looking at me and seeing a problem to be solved. I looked at my mother's hand covering mine. I realized with a sick jolt that she wasn't holding my hand to comfort me. She was pinning me down. I pulled my hand away slowly. "This is a lot to process," I said. "Aunt Sarah, I didn't know." "It is urgent, Clarissa," my father said, his voice hardening just a fraction. He pulled a gold fountain pen from his jacket pocket and uncapped it. "The creditors are moving fast. We need to file this tomorrow morning to ensure your protection. Sign it now, and we can put this nightmare behind us." He held the pen out to me. The nib glinted in the candlelight like a dagger. I looked at the pen. I looked at the document. I looked at their eager, predatory faces. I don't feel well," I said, clutching my stomach. It wasn't entirely a lie. The realization of their absolute moral bankruptcy was making me physically nauseous. "I think the bisque. My stomach is cramping." "Clarissa, please," my mother snapped, her mask slipping for a millisecond. "Just sign the paper. Then you can go home and rest." "I can't," I gasped, standing up and grabbing the portfolio. "I need to go to the restroom. I think I'm going to be sick." "Leave the folder here," my father commanded. His voice was no longer warm. It was the voice he used when he yelled at the gardeners. "I need to read it," I said, clutching the leather binder to my chest like a shield. "I'll read it in the bathroom. I just need a minute." I didn't wait for permission. I turned and walked briskly toward the ladies' room. But I didn't stop there. I kept walking. I walked past the maitre d', past the coat check, and out the front door into the cool night air. "Clarissa," I heard my father's voice behind me. I turned around near the valet stand. Richard Pembroke stood in the doorway of the restaurant. The warm, benevolent father was gone. In his place was a man with eyes like flint and a mouth twisted into a snarl. He looked at me with such raw, unadulterated hatred that I took a step back. "Get back here," he growled, ignoring the valet who was watching with wide eyes. Bring me that folder. I'm going home. Father, I called out, my voice ringing clear in the night. I need to rest. I will have my lawyer look at this in the morning. You don't have a lawyer, he shouted. Stepping onto the sidewalk, you are a waitress and a fix-it girl. Get back here and sign the damn paper. Good night, Richard, I said. I scrambled into my Honda, locked the doors, and started the engine. As I pulled away, I looked in the rearview mirror. My father was standing under the awning of Le Jardin, watching me go. He wasn't chasing me. He knew he couldn't make a scene on the street, but the look on his face told me everything I needed to know. The war had begun, and for the first time in my life, I had the ammunition. I reached over to the passenger seat and touched the leather portfolio. I had the proof of their fraud. Now, all I had to do was pull the trigger. The morning after the dinner at Le Jardin, I did not go to work. I called my supervisor at Gilded Horizons and told him I had a family emergency. In a way, it was the truth. The emergency was that my family was trying to erase me, and I had to stop them. I arrived at Thaddeus Stone's office at 8 in the morning, an hour before they officially opened. When the receptionist unlocked the door, I was waiting on the step, the leather portfolio clutched in my hands like a holy text. Mr. Stone saw me immediately. We sat in his library again, the rain from yesterday replaced by a sharp and cold sunlight that illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air. I slid the document my father had tried to force me to sign across the mahogany desk. They called it a liability release, I said, my voice steady. They said it was to protect me from Aunt Sarah's gambling debts. Stone put on his reading glasses and opened the folder. He read in silence for 10 minutes. I watched his face. I saw his eyebrows knit together, then rise in disbelief, and finally settle into a hard line of professional disgust. This is not a liability release, Stone said, closing the folder with a snap. This is a quitclaim deed wrapped in a fraud. If you had signed this, you would have legally transferred your entire interest in the trust to the secondary beneficiary Julianne in exchange for, essentially, $0, and the debts they mention, they are fictitious. There is no record of any Sarah Pembroke having outstanding creditors because Sarah Pembroke never existed. They looked me in the eye and cried, I said, a cold numbness spreading through my chest. My mother actually cried tears. They are desperate, Clarissa, and desperate people are sloppy. Stone tapped the document. By giving you this, they have handed us the smoking gun. This proves intent to defraud. We could take this to a judge today and have them removed as trustees immediately. No, I said. The word surprised even me. It was sharp, final. Stone looked at me over his glasses. No. If we go to a judge, it happens behind closed doors, I said. Standing up and walking to the window, I looked out at the street below, where people were rushing to work, oblivious to the war I was fighting. If we do this legally, quietly, my father will spin it. He will tell everyone I am mentally unstable, that I attacked them, that I am ungrateful. He will control the narrative. He will play the victim, and Newport will believe him because he is Richard Pembroke, and I am nobody. I turned back to face the lawyer. I do not want a settlement. Mr. Stone, I want a reckoning. Stone leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. What do you have in mind? You mentioned a timeline. I said, you said they are rushing because they have a buyer for the house. Yes, Stone nodded. And there is an event coming up, next Saturday, the Pembroke Centennial Gala. I froze. The Centennial. 100 years since your great-grandfather founded the family company, Stone explained. Richard is hosting a massive celebration at the cliffside. It is the social event of the season. Every board member, every investor, every major figure in Newport society will be there. My sources tell me Richard plans to use the event to announce two things: Julianne's appointment to the board as the future of the company, and the sale of the estate to modernize the family assets. The audacity was breathtaking. They were going to sell my house and give my birthright to Julianne in front of 300 witnesses, all while I was presumably sitting in my apartment, believing I was saving myself from imaginary debt collectors. That is it, I said. That is the stage. You want to serve them the eviction papers at the party? Stone asked, his eyes gleaming. I want to do more than that, I said. I want to introduce myself. They have spent 25 years hiding me, keeping me in the kitchen, keeping me in the shadows. Next Saturday, I am going to walk through the front door. Stone stood up and extended his hand. Then we have work to do. I will prepare the legal exhibit. You prepare the entrance. I left his office with a mission. The first thing I did was go to the bank. I had $3,000 in my savings account money. I had scraped together over 5 years of eating ramen and walking to work. It was supposed to be for a new car, or maybe a deposit on a better apartment. I withdrew half of it, $1,500. I drove to the upscale shopping district on Thames Street. I usually avoided this area. The shop assistants had a way of looking at my worn shoes and knowing I didn't belong. But today, I walked with my head high. I wasn't Clarissa the charity case anymore. I was Clarissa the landlord. I entered a boutique called Lumiere, the kind of place where they keep the door locked and you have to ring a buzzer to be let in. The salesgirl, a blonde woman with a headset, looked me up and down with skepticism as I walked in. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone suggesting she doubted I could afford the air conditioning. "I need a dress," I said. "For a formal gala." "Our sale rack is in the back," she said, gesturing vaguely toward a dark corner. "I am not looking for a sale," I said, meeting her gaze. "I am looking for red." "Red?" She raised an eyebrow. "We have a few pieces, but red is very aggressive." "That is the point," I said. My mother had always forbidden me from wearing red. "It is vulgar. Clarissa," she used to say, "it draws attention. You are not meant to be seen. Wear gray, wear beige, blend in." For 25 years, I had blended in. I had been part of the wallpaper. The salesgirl brought out 3 dresses. The first was too frilly. The second was too dark. But the third was a weapon made of silk. It was a floor-length gown in a shade of crimson so deep it looked like fresh arterial blood. It had a plunging neckline and a slit up the thigh that was bordering on scandalous. It was bold. It was dangerous. It was everything I was not supposed to be. I put it on in the dressing room. When I looked in the mirror, I gasped. The gray mousy girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who looked like she could burn a city to the ground and toast marshmallows on the embers. The dress hugged my curves, demanding to be looked at. "I'll take it," I told the salesgirl as I walked out, and the shoes in the window, the gold stilettos. The total came to $1,200. I handed over the cash without flinching. It was an investment in my own resurrection. The next 3 days were a blur of calculated activity. I did not contact my parents. I ignored the 12 text messages from my mother asking if I had signed the papers yet. I ignored the voicemails from my father that ranged from sweet to threatening. Instead, I went to the public library and used their computer. I searched for the board of directors of Pembroke Holdings. I found their names and their business addresses. Mr. Jonathan Sterling, Mrs. Abigail Vanderbilt, Mr. Charles Whitmore. These were the people who controlled the money. These were the people my father needed to impress. I typed out a formal letter on thick cream-colored paper I had bought at an art supply store. To the board of directors, you are cordially invited to witness a special announcement regarding the future leadership and asset management of the Pembroke estate. The true beneficiary of the Arthur Pembroke Trust will be making a formal address at the Centennial Gala. Signed, the representative of the Arthur Pembroke Trust. I did not sign my name. I let them wonder. I let them assume it was some lawyer or official. I mailed the letters overnight express. I sent copies to the Newport Daily News and the Rhode Island Gazette. By the time my parents realized what was happening, the audience would already be assembled. On Friday night, 24 hours before the party, my phone buzzed with a text from Julianne. "Julianne, Mom says you're acting weird. Just sign the papers. Freak. And don't bother coming tomorrow. We don't have a uniform that fits you, and we hired real caterers this time. Stay in your hole. I looked at the message. A week ago. It would have made me cry. It would have reinforced the voice in my head that said I was worthless. Now, I just stared at it like a scientist observing a bacteria under a microscope. It was small. It was pathetic. I didn't reply. I simply deleted the thread. Saturday morning dawned with a heavy fog rolling off the ocean. It was the day of the battle. I woke up early, but instead of preparing my hair or nails, I drove to the cemetery on the north side of the island. My grandfather's grave was located on a small hill overlooking the sea. It was a simple granite marker, stark against the gray sky. Arthur James Pembroke, beloved father and grandfather. I knelt in the wet grass. Not caring that the dampness was soaking into my jeans, I placed a single white rose on the stone. "Hello, grandfather," I whispered. The wind snatched my words away, carrying them out to sea. "I read the journal," I said. "I know what they did. I know what they made you do." I touched the cold stone, tracing the letters of his name. "You told me to be patient. You told me the truth was a slow-growing tree. Well, the tree has grown, grandfather, and it has thorns." I thought about the man who had secretly loved me, who had been forced to hide his affection to keep me safe from his own son. I thought about the years he spent watching them mistreat me, powerless to intervene without risking my expulsion from the family. He had played the long game. He had sacrificed his own peace of mind to ensure that one day I would have everything. "I am not going to let them sell the house," I promised him. "I am not going to let them destroy what you built. They think family is about bloodlines and reputation. I'm going to show them that family is about loyalty and truth." I stood up, wiping the dirt from my knees. The fog was beginning to lift, revealing the sharp, jagged line of the cliffs below. "Tonight," I said to the wind, "tonight, we take it all back." I walked back to my car. My phone buzzed again. It was Thaddeus Stone. Stone. "The eviction notice is notarized. The DNA results are certified. I will meet you at the main gate at 7:45. The board members have received your letters. They are expecting a show. Do not be late." I smiled. I drove back to my apartment to begin the transformation. I showered, scrubbing my skin until it tingled. I dried my hair, styling it in loose, wild waves instead of the severe bun my mother always forced me to wear. I applied makeup, dark eyeliner, sharp contour, and finally, a lipstick that matched the dress, deep, blood red. When I stepped into the dress, I felt a shift in the atmosphere of the room. The silk slid over my skin like water. I zipped it up, and the reflection in the mirror was a stranger. She stood tall. Her shoulders were back. Her eyes held a fire that could consume worlds. I put on the gold heels. I was 3 inches taller now. I grabbed the clutch bag where I had stashed the recording device and the key to the safe deposit box. I took one last look at my peeling apartment, at the water stain on the ceiling, at the empty ramen bowls in the sink. "Goodbye, Clarissa the victim," I whispered. I walked out the door and locked it for the last time. I wasn't coming back here. Tonight, I was going home, to the cliffside, and God help anyone who tried to stand in my way. The gravel of the driveway crunched under the tires of Thaddeus Stone's sleek black sedan as we approached the main gates of the cliffside. It was 7:45 in the evening. The fog from the morning had vanished, leaving behind a sky of polished obsidian, dotted with stars that looked cold and distant. The mansion was ablaze with light. Every window glowed, casting long, golden rectangles onto the manicured lawns where I had once spent hours pulling weeds. From this distance, the house looked like a cruise ship navigating a dark ocean, a vessel of light and music and immense, unearned wealth. I sat in the back seat, smoothing the silk of my crimson dress over my knees. My heart was not racing. That surprised me. I had expected to be terrified, to feel the familiar shake in my hands that always accompanied my return to this house. But the fear was gone. In its place was a vibrating stillness, like the air before a lightning strike. "Are you ready, Clarissa?" Thaddeus asked from the seat beside me. He looked formidable in his tuxedo, his silver hair combed back, a leather briefcase resting on his lap like a loaded weapon. "I have been ready for 25 years, I replied. My voice sounded deeper than usual, resonant in the quiet car. "Remember the plan," he said, checking his watch. "We enter through the main foyer. We do not stop for the coat check. We walk directly to the ballroom. Your father is scheduled to make his keynote speech at 8 o'clock. We want to be inside before he raises the toast." "I know." The car slowed. We were not parking by the dumpsters tonight. We joined the line of Bentleys and Rolls-Royces inching toward the grand portico. I watched the valet open the door of the car ahead of us, helping out a woman in a sparkling silver gown. I recognized her. It was Mrs. Vanderbilt, the chairwoman of the charity board my mother was desperate to join. When our car finally pulled up to the steps, the valet moved to open my door. I took a deep breath. This was the threshold. I stepped out. The night air was brisk, but the adrenaline coursing through my veins kept me warm. As I rose from the car, the red silk of my dress caught the light of the massive chandelier hanging in the portico. It rippled like liquid fire. I stood to my full height, aided by the 3-inch gold stilettos, the valet. A young man who had likely parked my rusted Honda a dozen times without looking at me, froze, his mouth opened slightly. He did not recognize me. To him, I was just another wealthy guest, perhaps a visiting heiress or a movie star. Thaddeus stepped out beside me, flanked by 2 large men in dark suits. They were private security, hired specifically for my protection. My father's security team, the ones who usually guarded the gate, watched us warily but made no move to stop us. They saw the suit, the car, and the confidence. They assumed we belonged. We walked up the limestone steps, the massive oak doors. Carved with the Pembroke family crest, a lion holding a shield loomed ahead. I had polished those doors 1,000 times. I knew every groove in the wood. Tonight, I was not polishing them, I was conquering them. Inside, the foyer was a kaleidoscope of wealth. A string orchestra was playing something swift and classical from the balcony above. The air smelled of expensive lilies and even more expensive champagne. Guests milled about, holding crystal flutes, their laughter tinkling like broken glass. As we moved toward the double doors of the ballroom, I saw heads turn. It started as a ripple. A man in a tuxedo glanced at me, then did a double take, nudging his wife. She looked, her eyes widening behind her spectacles. They didn't know who I was, but they knew I was something to look at. The dress was doing its work. It was a declaration of war painted in red. We reached the entrance to the ballroom just as the music softened. The murmur of the crowd died down. At the far end of the room, on a raised dais, draped in white velvet, stood my family. Richard Pembroke looked the part of the patriarch. He stood at the microphone, holding a glass of amber liquid, his face flushed with the intoxication of attention. Victoria stood beside him, clutching a bouquet of white roses, her smile fixed and brittle, and there was Julianne. She was wearing a white ball gown that looked suspiciously like a wedding dress, a tiara perched on her blonde curls. She looked like the princess of a kingdom built on sand. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard's voice boomed through the speakers, smooth and practiced. "Distinguished guests, members of the board. Thank you for joining us to celebrate 100 years of the Pembroke legacy." Thaddeus placed a hand on my arm, signaling me to wait. We stood in the shadows of the archway, unseen by the stage but visible to the back of the room. "Tonight is not just about the past," Richard continued, gesturing grandly to the room. "It is about the future. For a century, this house, the cliffside, has been the symbol of our family's stability. But true leadership requires the courage to evolve. It requires the vision to know when to let go of the old to embrace the new." He paused for effect. The room was silent. "That is why I am thrilled to announce 2 major developments," Richard said, beaming at Julianne. "First, I am officially appointing my daughter, Julianne Pembroke, to the board of directors. She is the future of this company, the bearer of our name, and the light of our lives." Polite applause rippled through the room. Julianne did a small, practiced curtsy, looking smug. "And second," Richard shouted over the applause, "to fund the next generation of Pembroke Ventures, specifically a cutting-edge technology initiative led by Julianne's fiancé. We have made the difficult but exciting decision to place the cliffside on the market." Gasps of surprise echoed off the high ceilings. Selling the ancestral home. It was unheard of. "We have already secured a buyer," Richard lied smoothly, "and we expect to close the deal by the end of the month. This liquidity will ensure that the Pembroke name remains a titan of industry for another 100 years. Now," he raised his glass high, "to the future, to the future." The crowd echoed. Objection. The word was not shouted. It was spoken with a clear, piercing alto resonance that cut through the room like a blade. I stepped out of the shadows. Thaddeus Stone walked beside me, and the 2 bodyguards flanked us. We moved into the center aisle of the ballroom. The guests nearest to us turned, startled. Then they parted. It was instinctual. You do not stand in the way of a woman wearing blood-red silk walking with that kind of purpose. Richard froze on stage. His glass hovered halfway to his mouth. He squinted against the spotlights, trying to see who had interrupted his moment. I kept walking. The sound of my heels on the marble floor was a rhythmic, solitary percussion in the silent room. Click, click, click. "Who is that?" someone whispered. Is that the other one? My God, look at her." I saw the recognition hit my mother first. Victoria dropped her bouquet. The white roses hit the floor, scattering petals like teeth. Her face went from polite confusion to absolute, sheet-white horror. She grabbed Richard's arm, her nails digging into his suit jacket. Richard saw me then. His eyes bulged. He looked like he was seeing a ghost, or perhaps an executioner. I stopped 10 feet from the stage. I stood in the center of the room, surrounded by 300 of Newport's elite, and I did not flinch. I let them look. I let them see the high cheekbones that matched my father's, the chin that matched my grandfather's, and the eyes that were entirely my own. "You cannot sell this house, Richard," I said. I didn't use a microphone, but my voice carried to the back of the room. "Because it is not yours to sell." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum. Victoria recovered first. Her survival instinct, honed by decades of social climbing, kicked in. She rushed down the stairs of the stage, her heels clattering. She didn't run to greet me. She ran to intercept me. She moved with the frantic energy of a woman trying to stomp out a fire before it burned down her curtains. She reached me in seconds. Her face was a mask of contorted fury. Her teeth bared in a rictus grin that probably looked like a smile from a distance, but looked like a snarl up close. "What do you think you are doing?" she hissed. Her voice a venomous whisper meant only for me. "You ungrateful little brat. Get out. Get out right now." She reached out and grabbed my upper arm, her fingers digging into the flesh, trying to physically steer me toward the service exit. It was the same move she had used 1,000 times before. The physical domination, the steering of the unwanted child. "Go to the back door," she spat. "You are embarrassing us. You look like a whore in that dress. Get out before I have you arrested." I looked down at her hand on my arm. Then I looked at her face. I didn't pull away. I didn't struggle. I simply reached up with my own hand, gripped her wrist, and removed her hand from my body. I did it slowly, deliberately, with a strength she didn't know I possessed. I held her wrist in the air for a second, then dropped it. "Do not touch me," I said. My voice was ice. "How dare you?" Victoria gasped, clutching her wrist. "I am your mother. I own this house." I laughed. It was a dark, rich sound that seemed to startle her more than the dress. "No, Victoria," I said, loud enough for the board of directors in the front row to hear. "You don't." I took a step closer to her, forcing her to step back. "You are standing on my floor." The words hung in the air. My floor. "You are insane," Victoria stammered, backing away until she bumped into the edge of the stage. "Security Richard, Get security. Richard had snapped out of his paralysis. He realized the room was watching. He realized his narrative was crumbling. He threw his glass down on the table. It didn't break, but the liquid splashed over the white tablecloth like a stain and stormed to the edge of the dais. Get her out of here, Richard roared, pointing a shaking finger at me. He looked at the security guards lining the walls. Remove this woman. She is trespassing. She is mentally unstable. 3 uniformed guards stepped forward. They were big men, the kind used to tossing drunks out of nightclubs. They started to move toward me, their hands reaching for their belts. The crowd gasped. A few people stepped back, anticipating violence. Stay back, Richard shouted. Drag her out. I didn't move. I didn't look at the guards. I kept my eyes locked on my father. Mr. Stone, I said calmly. Thaddeus Stone stepped forward. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It wasn't a thick legal document. It was a single page with a gold seal. He held it up. Gentlemen, Stone said to the approaching guards. His voice was authoritative, the voice of a man who billed $800 an hour. I am the executor of the Arthur Pembroke estate. This woman is Clarissa Pembroke, the sole legal owner of this property as of Tuesday. The guards stopped. They looked at Richard. They looked at Stone. He is lying, Richard screamed, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. I pay your salaries. Do as I say. Throw her out. The head of security, a man named Miller who had worked at the cliffside for 10 years, looked at my father. Miller knew me. He had seen me scrubbing the driveway. He had seen me crying behind the garage. He had seen Richard kick my dog when I was 12. Miller looked at the paper in Stone's hand. Then he looked at me. I gave him a small nod. Miller stopped. He raised a hand to his team. Stand down, Miller said. What? Richard screeched. I said throw her out. You're fired. You're all fired. You can't fire us, Mr. Pembroke, Miller said, his voice flat. Because you don't sign the checks anymore. The trust does. Miller crossed his arms and stepped back, effectively forming a protective line behind me. Richard stood on the stage, his finger still pointing, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. His power, the absolute authority he had wielded for decades, had just evaporated. He looked at the guards, then at the silent, staring crowd, and finally at me. You, he whispered, the microphone picking up the tremble in his voice. You did this. Yes, Father, I said, stepping past Victoria and walking up the stairs to the stage. I moved slowly, ascending the platform where they had looked down on me for my entire life. I reached the microphone. Richard backed away as if I were radioactive. Julianne was huddled near the DJ booth, clutching her tiara, looking terrified. I stood at the podium. I gripped the sides of it. I looked out at the sea of faces, the people who had mocked me, the people who had ignored me, the people who had believed the lie. My name is Clarissa Pembroke, I said into the microphone. My voice boomed, filling the cavernous room, bouncing off the frescoes my grandfather had loved. And I apologize for the interruption, but there has been a mistake in the program. There will be no sale of the cliffside tonight. I turned to look at my parents. They were huddled together now, small and vicious and afraid. Because you cannot sell what you stole, I said. The room erupted, not with applause, but with the chaotic, buzzing noise of a scandal breaking in real time. I saw phone cameras rising like fireflies in the dark. I saw the shock on the faces of the board members. I looked at Thaddeus Stone down on the floor. He gave me a thumbs up. The performance was over. The trial had begun, and I was the judge, the jury, and the executioner in red silk. The microphone in my hand felt heavy, cold, and solid, the only grounded thing in a room that was rapidly losing its gravity. I watched Thaddeus Stone move with deliberate, agonizing slowness to the side of the stage. He placed his leather briefcase on a small table near the projector that had been set up for my father's self-congratulatory video montage. Thaddeus unplugged the existing cable and inserted his own. The screen behind me, which had been displaying a looping image of the Pembroke family crest, flickered black for a heartbeat. Then it turned a stark, blinding white. Richard Pembroke made a lunging motion toward the lawyer, but Miller, the head of security, stepped smoothly into his path. My father bounced off the large man's chest like a bird hitting a window. He stumbled back, panting, his face a rictus of panic. "Turn it off!" Richard screamed, his voice cracking. "Cut the power! Someone cut the power!" No one moved. The room was held in a trance of morbid curiosity. The board members in the front row, Mr. Sterling, Mrs. Vanderbilt, Mr. Whitmore, were leaning forward, their drinks forgotten. They smelled blood in the water. And in the world of high finance, nothing is more captivating than a predator becoming prey. "Welcome to my home," I said. My voice was not loud, but the speakers amplified the terrifying calmness of it. I did not sound angry. I sounded like a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis. For 25 years, you have all been told a very specific story about who I am. You were told I was the unfortunate debris of a family tragedy. You were told I was the daughter of a woman named Sarah, a drug addict, a black sheep, a ghost. I turned to look at my mother. Victoria was trembling so violently that the sequins on her dress were creating a shivering sound, like a rattlesnake's tail. "But ghosts are convenient, aren't they, Mother?" I asked. "They cannot speak, they cannot defend themselves, and most importantly, they cannot claim an inheritance." I nodded to Thaddeus. He hit a key on his laptop. The first document appeared on the massive screen behind me. It was magnified to 10 feet tall. The seal of the Massachusetts General Hospital was the size of a dinner plate, but it was the text in the center that drew every eye in the room. Certificate of Live Birth. Date October 12, 2000. Child: Clarissa Ann Pembroke. Mother Victoria Elizabeth Pembroke. Father Richard James Pembroke. A sound swept through the ballroom. It wasn't a gasp. It was a low, collective intake of breath. The sound of 300 people realizing they had been lied to for a quarter of a century. "That is a forgery," Richard bellowed. He had regained his voice, and he was using it to try and shatter the reality I was building. He pointed a shaking finger at the screen. "She typed that up. She is sick, I told you all. The girl has always been mentally unstable. She is obsessed with belonging to us. This is a delusion." "It is a certified copy obtained directly from the state archives," I said, my voice cutting through his hysteria. "Notarized by the clerk of court this morning." "Lies," Richard shouted, looking wildly at the crowd, desperate for an ally. "We adopted her. We saved her. She is trying to steal Julianne's birthright." "We expected you to say that," I said. "We expected you to deny the paper. After all, paper can be faked. Ink can be forged." I took a step closer to him. The distance between us was closing, not just physically, but existentially. "But biology is harder to fake, isn't it, Father?" I signaled Thaddeus again. The screen changed. This document was more complex. It was a grid of numbers, colored bars, and genetic markers. It was a paternity test report from Helix Forensics, one of the most reputable labs in the country. "Last Tuesday," I said, addressing the audience now, "my parents invited me to dinner at Le Jardin. They claimed it was a birthday celebration. In reality, they spent the evening trying to coerce me into signing a fraudulent document to renounce my rights. They thought I left early because I had a stomach ache." I looked at Richard. He had gone deadly pale. "I didn't leave because I was sick, Father. I left because I had your water glass. You were so busy trying to threaten me that you didn't notice when I slipped it into my purse wrapped in a napkin." I pointed to the screen. "Probability of paternity 99.999%. You are my father, Richard," I said, "and Victoria is my mother. There was never an Aunt Sarah. You invented a dead woman because you were too cowardly to admit you had a child out of wedlock before your election campaign. You erased my identity to protect your poll numbers." The room was silent now, deadly silent, the kind of silence where careers end and reputations die. "No," Julianne whispered. She was standing near the DJ booth, her hands clutching the tulle of her white dress. Her face was streaked with mascara. She looked from the screen to our parents, her eyes wide with the shattering of her world. "Mom?" Julianne's voice was small, pleading. "Mom, tell her it's not true. Tell her Aunt Sarah is real." Victoria didn't answer. She couldn't. She was staring at the floor, her hand covering her mouth, trapped in the wreckage of her own deceit. "Tell her!" Julianne screamed, stamping her foot. "Tell her she's lying." "She can't, Julianne," I said softly, "because she knows that if she lies under oath, she goes to prison. And unlike this house, prison is not somewhere she wants to live." I turned back to the crowd. You all heard the phrase, adopted in spirit. You heard them call me, not real family. They used those words to justify making me sleep in the attic. They used those words to justify making me scrub the floors while my sister went to ballet camp. They used those words to make me feel like I owed them my life. I took a deep breath, feeling the power of the truth filling my lungs. But here is the irony. They were right. I am not their family, because family protects you. Family doesn't hide you like a dirty secret. Family doesn't try to trick you into poverty to pay for their vacations. Richard was panting now, his eyes darting around the room, looking for an exit, looking for a lawyer, looking for anything but me. This is a private matter," he stammered, his voice weak. "We will discuss this at home. Everyone, please, the party is over. Go home." "We are at home. Richard," I said. "My home." "Mr. Stone," I commanded, "please explain the economics of the evening." Thaddeus Stone stepped up to the microphone. He didn't need to shout. His voice was dry, professional, and lethal. He held up the blue-ribbon document, the trust. 25 years ago, Thaddeus began, Arthur Pembroke established an irrevocable living trust. He placed the deed to this estate, the majority shares of Pembroke Holdings, and all liquid assets into that trust. The screen changed again. This time, it showed the beneficiary clause. Sole beneficiary, the first biological grandchild of Arthur Pembroke. As the biological daughter of Richard Pembroke, born 2 years prior to Julianne Pembroke, Clarissa is the primary and sole beneficiary, Stone stated. The trust matured. Last Tuesday, as of that moment, all assets transferred legally and automatically to Clarissa Pembroke. Stone took off his glasses and looked directly at the board of directors. This means that the current occupants, Richard and Victoria Pembroke, have no legal claim to this property, they have no ownership of the company shares, and most importantly, the announcement Richard made tonight about selling this estate is legally void. He cannot sell it. He does not own it. He is, effectively, a guest who has overstayed his welcome. The sound of a glass shattering broke the spell. Julianne had dropped her champagne flute. "You mean I get nothing?" she shrieked. Her voice was shrill, piercing the sophisticated atmosphere of the gala. "Daddy promised me the money for the startup. He promised me the board seat. He promised you things that weren't his to give." "Julianne," I said. "But I'm the heir," she wailed, turning on our father. "You said I was the heir. You said she was just the charity case." "Shut up, Julianne," Richard snapped, the veins in his neck bulging. "Don't talk to her like that," I said sharply. "She is a victim of your lies too. Richard, you used her just as much as you used me. You turned her into a spoiled brat to distract from the fact that you were bankrupting her future." "I am not bankrupt," Richard roared, lunging toward the podium again. "I am Richard Pembroke. I built this company." "You inherited this company," I corrected him, "and then you looted it." I signaled Thaddeus for the final slide. It was a bank statement. The personal accounts of Richard and Victoria Pembroke. The balance was highlighted in angry red ink. -$4,200,000. "You are broke, Father," I said. "You have been living off the management stipend from my trust fund, and as of today, that stipend is canceled." Richard stopped. He looked at the screen. He looked at the red numbers that stripped him naked in front of the people he had spent a lifetime trying to impress. The facade was gone. The old money mystique was gone. He was just a man in a tuxedo with a negative bank balance and a history of fraud. You can't do this," he whispered. "We are your parents." "Biologically, yes," I said. "But in spirit, I think we established a long time ago that spirit doesn't pay the mortgage." I looked out at the crowd. The shock had turned to judgment. The whispers were no longer confused. They were condemnations. I saw Mrs. Vanderbilt turn her back on my mother. I saw Mr. Sterling shaking his head, already calculating the damage to the company stock. "The party is over," I said into the microphone. "For my guests, the board members, the investors, the staff, you are welcome to stay. The champagne is paid for, and it belongs to me now. Please, drink it. Celebrate the truth." I turned to my parents and my sister. "But for the imposters, I suggest you start packing. You have a very difficult morning ahead of you." Richard looked at me with a hatred so pure it felt like heat on my skin. But he didn't move toward me. He couldn't. He looked at Miller, the security guard who used to take his orders. Miller just crossed his arms and stared back, unblinking, defeated. Richard Pembroke slumped. His shoulders collapsed. He looked suddenly old, small, and pathetic. He turned to Victoria, but she wouldn't look at him. She was staring at the red dress, realizing that the color she had forbidden was the color that had just destroyed her life. I placed the microphone back on the stand. The click echoed through the silent room. I walked down the stairs of the stage. The crowd parted for me again, but this time it wasn't out of confusion, it was out of deference. I walked straight to the bar, where a stunned bartender was holding a bottle of vintage Dom Perignon. "Pour me a glass, please," I said. My hand didn't shake as I took the flute. I took a sip. It was cold, crisp, and tasted like justice. I turned back to watch my family standing on the stage, isolated in the spotlight, exposed to the world. The show was over, but the reckoning had only just begun. The sip of champagne was the catalyst. It was a gesture of such absolute, nonchalant ownership that it snapped the last tether of my father's sanity. To Richard Pembroke, the idea that his daughter, the creature he had banished to the scullery, the stain he had tried to scrub from his history, was now drinking his vintage wine while he stood exposed as a fraud, was a provocation beyond endurance. I saw the change in his eyes first. The fear evaporated, replaced by a primal, rabid violence. He let out a sound that was less like a human cry and more like the roar of a wounded animal. "You thief!" he screamed, his voice shredding the sophisticated silence of the ballroom. "You ungrateful, parasitic little bitch, I will kill you." He launched himself off the dais. For a man of 60, he moved with terrifying speed. Propelled by the adrenaline of total ruin, he charged toward me, his hands curled into claws, his face contorted into a mask of pure murder. The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath that sucked the air out of the room. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I stood my ground, the crystal flute still in my hand, watching him come. But he never reached me. Miller, the head of security who had spent a decade silently watching my father mistreat me, moved like a granite wall. He stepped into the aisle, intercepting Richard 3 feet from where I stood. Miller didn't strike him. He simply caught him. He wrapped his massive arms around my father's chest and pinned his arms to his sides. "Let me go," Richard shrieked, thrashing against the younger, stronger man. "I am going to strangle her. I am going to wring her neck." "That is enough, Richard," Miller said, his voice flat and bored. The scene was grotesque. The patriarch of Newport, the man who had shaken hands with senators and dined with dukes, was now spitting and kicking like a toddler in a supermarket. And the world was watching. I saw the phones, hundreds of them. They were held high, recording every second of his degradation. The live stream comments were scrolling so fast they were a blur on the screens I could see from the corner of my eye. Pembroke meltdown was probably trending already. The flashes of professional cameras popped continuously, a strobe light of shame illuminating my father's twisted face. "Get him off me!" Richard yelled, looking toward the board of directors for help. "Sterling Whitmore, help me. This is assault." Mr. Sterling, the chairman of the board, didn't move. He took a slow sip of his whiskey, watching the scene with cold detachment. In our world, you can survive a scandal, but you cannot survive a loss of control. Richard Pembroke had just become a liability. I handed my champagne glass to a passing waiter and nodded to Thaddeus Stone. It was time for the final nail in the coffin. "Mr. Pembroke seems to believe this is a civil dispute," I said into the microphone, my voice calm over the sound of my father's struggling. "He believes this is just a family squabble over a house. But Thaddeus, perhaps you should clarify the legal standing of the finances." Thaddeus stepped forward again. He looked at Richard, who was still pinned in Miller's grip, panting and red-faced. "Richard," Thaddeus said, his voice projecting clearly without shouting, "we are not just talking about the house. We are talking about the maintenance fund." Richard went still. The fight drained out of him instantly, replaced by the paralyzed terror of a man who realizes the trap has snapped shut on his neck. Thaddeus turned to the audience. "When Arthur Pembroke established the trust," he explained, "he allocated a specific fund for the upkeep of this historic estate. It was $5 million, intended to be used strictly for roof repairs, structural maintenance, and preservation of the grounds over a 20-year period." Thaddeus clicked the remote. The screen behind us changed to a spreadsheet filled with transfers. "Our forensic audit, completed yesterday, shows that over the last 10 years, Richard and Victoria Pembroke have systematically drained this fund. They did not use it for the roof. They did not use it for the grounds." Thaddeus pointed to the highlighted lines. "They used it to pay off personal credit cards. They used it to lease luxury vehicles. They used it to fund Julianne's private tuition and her European travels. In legal terms, this is not just mismanagement." Thaddeus looked directly at my father. "This is embezzlement. It is grand larceny, and it is a federal crime." The word crime hung in the air. The guests exchanged looks. This wasn't just gossip anymore. This was prison time. "So here's the situation," I said. Taking back control of the room, I walked slowly toward where Miller was holding my father. I stopped just out of spitting range. "You are not just bankrupt, Richard. You are a criminal. I have the evidence to send you to a federal penitentiary for 10 to 15 years. Richard stared at me. His eyes were wet, terrified. He looked at his wife. Victoria was standing by the stage, her hand over her mouth, shaking her head as if denying reality could change it. "However," I continued, smoothing the silk of my red dress, "I am not interested in a long, drawn-out trial. I am not interested in dragging the Pembroke name, my name, through the mud of a courtroom for 2 years. I raised a finger. So I am giving you a choice, a one-time offer." The room was so quiet you could hear the ocean crashing against the cliffs outside. "You have 24 hours, I said. 24 hours to vacate this property. You will take only your personal clothing and toiletries. You will leave the furniture, the art, the jewelry, and the cars. Those were purchased with trust money, which means they belong to me." 24 hours, Richard croaked. "But where will we go?" "That is not my concern," I said coldly. "If you are still on the premises at 8 o'clock tomorrow evening, I will hand this file to the district attorney, and you won't be looking for an apartment. You will be looking for a bail bondsman. Clarissa, please." The scream came from my mother. Victoria rushed forward, throwing herself between me and Richard, but she didn't attack me. She did something far worse. She fell to her knees. It was a performance worthy of an Academy Award. She grabbed the hem of my red dress with both hands, burying her face in the silk. She wept loudly, theatrically, her shoulders heaving. "Clarissa, my baby, my sweet girl," she wailed, looking up at me with mascara running down her cheeks. "Please, don't do this. We are your family. I am your mother. I carried you. I loved you." The crowd murmured. It was uncomfortable to watch. A mother begging her child. It was designed to make me look cruel, to make me look like the villain destroying the family unit. Think of all the memories, Victoria sobbed, tightening her grip on my dress. Think of how we took care of you. I know we weren't perfect, but a mother's love is unconditional. You can't send your own mother to the street. Have mercy. Clarissa, for the sake of the love I bear you. I looked down at her. I looked at the woman who had spent 25 years telling me I was a mistake. I felt the heat of her hands on my dress, the same hands that had pushed me away when I tried to hug her as a child. I didn't pull away. I didn't kick her. I leaned down. I brought my face close to hers, so close that the microphone clipped to my dress hovered right between us. The sound system picked up every breath. A mother's love, I whispered, my voice amplified to a terrifying volume in the silent hall. Victoria nodded frantically, hope sparking in her eyes. Yes, yes, darling. Do you remember my 16th birthday? Victoria, I asked softly. She froze. The hope flickered. I found a locket in the attic, I said, my voice steady and hard as diamond. It was gold. It had a C on it. I thought it was the only thing my mother had ever left me. I thought it was proof that someone, somewhere, had loved me. I paused. The memory was visceral. I could feel the ghost of the chain snapping on my neck. You ripped it off my neck, I said. You called me a thief. You called me filth, and then you threw it out the window into the mud. Victoria's mouth opened, but no sound came out. You didn't just throw away a piece of jewelry that day. Mother, I said, standing up and towering over her kneeling form. You threw away your daughter. You killed any love I had for you in that garden. You buried it in the dirt with that locket. I ripped my dress from her grip. Don't talk to me about a mother's love, I spat. You are not a mother. You are just a woman who gave birth to a paycheck. Victoria collapsed back onto her heels, defeated. The truth of the moment was absolute. There was no spinning it. No one in that room could look at her and see a victim anymore. They saw a monster who had tormented a child. I looked up at the crowd. The show is over, I announced. I suggest you all leave. I have locks to change. For a moment, no one moved. Then, Mr. Sterling set his whiskey glass down on the table with a decisive clink. He turned his back on Richard and Victoria without a word and walked toward the exit. It was the signal. The floodgates opened. The guests began to stream toward the doors. They moved quickly, eyes averted, desperate to distance themselves from the stench of failure. As they passed the stage, they looked at my parents, Richard held by security, Victoria weeping on the floor with undisguised contempt. In Newport, losing your money is a tragedy, but losing your dignity is a sin. The Pembrokes had committed the cardinal sin. Wait, don't go. The scream came from the corner. Julianne ran to the center of the stage. She looked deranged. Her tiara was crooked, her veil torn. She grabbed the microphone stand I had abandoned. You can't leave, she shrieked at the retreating backs of the guests. What about me? What about my engagement? What about my company? No one stopped. No one turned around. Her fiancé, Todd, was already near the exit, typing furiously on his phone, likely calling his lawyer to annul the engagement before the ink was dry on the prenup. Julianne turned to our parents. She looked at Richard, broken and panting. She looked at Victoria, sobbing on the floor. And then she looked at me, standing tall in red silk. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She wasn't the princess anymore. She was the daughter of two criminals, and she was broke. You lied to me, Julianne screamed, turning on Richard. She rushed at him, scratching at his face with her manicured nails. Miller had to step back to avoid her. You told me I was the heir. You told me I was special. You made me treat her like dirt because you said she was nobody. And now I have nothing. I have nothing because of you. Julianne, stop, Richard yelled, trying to shield his face. We did it for you. We did it to give you a good life. You did it for yourselves. She screamed, her voice breaking into a sob. You used me. You made me a monster. I hate you. I hate both of you. She threw her tiara on the ground. It bounced with a hollow, plastic sound. Then she ran. She ran off the stage, tripping over her heavy skirt, and fled through the service exit, the same exit they had forced me to use for 25 years. The room emptied. The music had stopped. The only sounds left were Victoria's quiet, broken weeping, and the heavy breathing of my father. "Get them out of my sight," I said to Miller. "Lock them in the guest cottage for tonight. Make sure they don't take anything valuable. Tomorrow at 8 o'clock. Toss them out the gate." "Understood, Ms. Pembroke," Miller said. He hauled Richard to his feet. My father didn't fight anymore. He looked at me one last time. There was no anger left in his eyes, only a vast, hollow confusion. He couldn't understand how the world had inverted itself so quickly. "Clarissa," he whispered. "Goodbye, Richard," I said. Miller dragged him away. A second guard helped Victoria up. She couldn't walk on her own. She was limp, a puppet with its strings cut. They led her away into the shadows. Thaddeus Stone packed up his laptop. He walked over to me. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. I looked around the empty ballroom. The floor was littered with confetti, discarded programs, and the white roses my mother had dropped. It looked like a battlefield after the smoke had cleared. The silence was heavy, but it wasn't oppressive. It was the silence of a vacuum waiting to be filled. "I don't know," I said honestly. "You did it," Thaddeus said. "You took it back." "Yes," I said. "I did. I will handle the police report regarding the embezzlement," he said. "You should rest. It has been a long century." He squeezed my shoulder and walked away, his footsteps echoing until the great oak doors clicked shut behind him. I was alone. I stood in the center of the stage, the spot where my father had stood an hour ago to announce his lies. I looked out at the vast, empty room. The chandeliers were still burning, casting a million diamonds of light across the walls. I waited for the tears. I waited for the crash, the grief, the guilt of destroying my own family. I checked my internal landscape, searching for the sadness that I thought would be there. But there was nothing. My chest felt light. The crushing weight that had sat on my sternum since I was 5 years old was gone. I took a deep breath, and the air didn't taste like fear anymore. It tasted like lilies and expensive wax and possibility. I walked down the stairs and across the dance floor. I stopped at the spot where Victoria had knelt. I looked at the floor. There was a single sequin from her dress caught in the gap between the marble tiles. I kicked it away. I walked to the massive French doors that opened onto the terrace. I pushed them open and stepped out into the night. The ocean was black and restless below, crashing against the cliffs that gave the house its name. The wind whipped my red dress around my legs, the silk snapping like a flag. I wasn't an orphan. I wasn't a charity case. I wasn't a mistake. I was Clarissa Pembroke. This was my ocean. This was my house. And for the first time in 25 years, the silence didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like freedom. I didn't cry. Instead, I raised my face to the stars and let the cold wind dry the sweat on my skin. I had burned the kingdom down. Yes, but the view from the ashes was magnificent. 3 months have passed since the night I walked onto the stage in a red dress and burned down the house of Pembroke. The silence that used to suffocate the cliffside is gone, replaced by the cacophony of construction crews, the whine of power drills, and the shouting of architects. To some, it might sound like chaos. To me, it sounds like a heartbeat restarting after a long cardiac arrest. I am standing in the main foyer, watching a team of workers carefully lower the massive crystal chandelier that used to hang over my parents' heads like a sword of Damocles. It is being crated up to be sold. The proceeds will go to the new foundation I have established. We are not selling the house, but we are stripping it of its vanity. The portrait of my father that hung above the fireplace, the one where he looked like a benevolent king, has already been removed. In its place, I plan to hang a piece by a local artist, something vibrant and messy and real. The cliffside is no longer a private fortress for a family of 3. By next spring, It will reopen as the Arthur Pembroke Center for the Arts. The ballroom where I was humiliated will become a gallery space for young, underrepresented artists. The guest wings will be converted into residency studios for painters and sculptors who, like me, need a place to work without apology. It is exactly what my grandfather would have wanted. He built this fortune, and now, finally, it is being used to build people up rather than keep them down. I have not seen Richard or Victoria since the morning Miller escorted them off the property. However, Thaddeus Stone keeps me informed. He handles the debris of their lives, so I do not have to. The legal fallout was swift and brutal. Faced with the undeniable evidence of the $5 million they had embezzled from the maintenance fund and the looming threat of a federal indictment, my parents chose the only option that would keep them out of a prison cell. They accepted a plea deal. It required full restitution. To pay me back the money they stole, they had to liquidate everything. The vacation home in the Hamptons, which I learned they had mortgaged to the hilt, was sold. The fleet of luxury cars was repossessed. Victoria's jewelry collection, the furs, the designer furniture, even the expensive watches my father collected, it all went under the hammer. Thaddeus told me they are currently renting a 2-bedroom apartment in a rundown complex on the north side of Providence, not far from the neighborhood where I used to live. It is a 4th-floor walk-up with no elevator. I imagine the irony tastes bitter in their mouths. According to Thaddeus, the neighbors have already filed noise complaints. Apparently, Richard and Victoria spend their days screaming at each other, casting blame back and forth like a hot coal. Richard blames Victoria for not being stricter with me. Victoria blames Richard for his arrogance. Neither of them blames themselves. They are trapped in a purgatory of their own making, forced to live with the only person they despise more than me, each other. I do not feel happy about their misery. I do not feel sad, either. I feel a profound, neutral distance. They are no longer the giants who controlled my sky. They are just two people who made a series of terrible financial and moral decisions. And now they are living with the math. As for Julianne, the reality check was even sharper. Her fiancé, Todd, did not even last 24 hours after the gala. As soon as the news broke that the Pembrokes were insolvent and that Julianne was not the heir, he ended the engagement via a text message. He didn't even have the decency to call. It turns out his love was entirely conditional on her trust fund. Julianne is currently working as a front desk receptionist at the Jade Lotus, a mid-range day spa in downtown Newport. A friend sent me a photo of her recently. She was wearing a beige uniform, answering phones, and booking appointments for wealthy women she used to party with. For the first time in her life, she is on the other side of the service counter. She is learning what it means to stand on your feet for 8 hours a day. She is learning that respect is earned, not inherited. My phone still blocks their numbers, but occasionally, I check the blocked messages folder. It is a morbid curiosity. I suppose the messages follow a predictable cycle. First, there are the demands. You owe us. This is illegal. Then, the guilt trips. How can you let your mother live like this? We have no heat. And finally, the begging. Just $5,000. Clarissa. Please. I never reply. Thaddeus manages a small, very modest stipend for them, enough to ensure they do not starve, but not enough to buy a bottle of wine. It is more than they gave me, and far more than they deserve. That is my final act of charity. My life, however, has blossomed. 2 weeks after the gala, I walked into Gilded Horizons. The manager, Mr. Henderson, looked nervous. He had heard the rumors. He expected me to quit, or perhaps he expected me to demand special treatment. I am not here to quit, Mr. Henderson, I told him, placing a contract on his desk. I am here to invest. Using a portion of the liquid assets from the trust, I bought the auction house. It was a strategic acquisition. Gilded Horizons had the reputation, but it lacked the vision. I kept my workbench in the back. I still restore paintings because it soothes my soul, but I also took the corner office. I fired the snobs who treated the staff like furniture. I promoted the quiet, hard-working assistants who knew the inventory better than the managers. Now, when I walk through the door, I am not the fix-it girl. I am the owner, but I still make my own coffee, and I still know the name of the night janitor. I promised myself I would never become the kind of person my father was. Power does not have to be a weapon, it can be a tool. But the most significant moment of the last 3 months did not happen in a boardroom or a lawyer's office. It happened on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Right here at the house, I was in the library, sorting through my grandfather's books, when I heard a knock at the service entrance. I opened the door to find Mrs. Higgins standing there. She had been the head housekeeper for the Pembrokes for 30 years. My mother had fired her the day after the gala in a fit of rage. Blaming the staff for letting me in, Mrs. Higgins was holding a small velvet pouch. Her hands, gnarled with arthritis, were shaking slightly. "Miss Clarissa," she said, her eyes wet. "I heard you were back. I heard you took the house." "I did, Mrs. Higgins," I said, inviting her in out of the rain. "Please, come inside." "I can't stay," she said. "I just wanted to return this to its rightful owner. I have kept it hidden in my sewing box for 9 years. She pressed the pouch into my hand. I opened it. Inside, nestled in the dark fabric, was a gold heart-shaped locket. The chain was broken. The links twisted where my mother had snapped them. The gold was scratched from where it had hit the rocks in the garden. But there it was, the letter C engraved on the back. "I saw her throw it," Mrs. Higgins whispered. "That night, after everyone went to sleep, I went out into the mud with a flashlight. I couldn't leave it there. It was yours. I knew how much it meant to you." "You kept it?" I asked, my voice choking up. "All this time. I was afraid she would find it and destroy it for good." Mrs. Higgins said, "So I hid it. I was waiting for the day you came back." I looked at the woman standing before me. She was not blood. She was not a Pembroke. She was an employee who had been paid minimum wage to scrub toilets, and yet she had shown me more loyalty, more love, and more protection in one act than my parents had shown me in a lifetime. "Thank you." I wept, hugging her. "Thank you." I hired Mrs. Higgins on the spot as the estate manager for the new art center. She cried, I cried. We drank tea in the kitchen, not as servant and mistress, but as 2 women who had survived the Pembroke regime. I took the locket to a jeweler the next day. He fixed the chain. He buffed out the scratches. Though he couldn't remove them entirely, I told him to leave them. They are part of the story. I wear it every day now. It rests against my collarbone, a reminder that some things can be broken and buried in the mud, but they can still be recovered. They can still shine. And that brings me to this moment. I am sitting on the balcony of the master's suite, a room I was never allowed to enter as a child. The sun is setting over the Atlantic, painting the sky in shades of violet and burnt orange. The air is cold, crisp with the coming winter. But the tea in my grandfather's porcelain cup is warm. I look out at the horizon. For so long, I defined myself by what I lacked. I lacked a mother's touch. I lacked a father's pride. I lacked a name. I lacked a place. I let their definition of me, adopted in spirit, unwanted in reality, become the architecture of my soul. But the architecture has changed. I realize now that the revenge I sought wasn't about stripping them of their money. Though that was a necessary justice, it wasn't about humiliating them in public. Though that was the only way to break their narrative. The real revenge was simply refusing to accept their version of the truth. They told me I was nothing. The trust proved I was everything. They told me I was alone. The reality proved I had allies in the shadows. My grandfather, Thaddeus, Mrs. Higgins. They told me I wasn't real family. They were right. I wasn't their definition of family. I was something stronger. I was the truth they tried to bury. I take a sip of tea. I can hear the waves crashing against the cliffs below. It is the same sound I heard when I was 5, and 10, and 16. But the girl who listened to them then was a prisoner. The woman listening to them now is free. I am Clarissa Pembroke. I am the daughter of my own resilience. I am the heir to a legacy I had to fight to claim. And as the sun dips below the water, extinguishing the last light of the day, I do not feel afraid of the dark. I know now that I can generate my own light. I place the cup on the saucer. I touch the locket at my throat. I smile. I am home. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It has been a long journey from the attic to the balcony, and I am grateful you walked it with me. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from a busy subway in New York, a quiet room in London, or maybe a sunny park in Sydney? Please drop your location in the comments below. I love reading through them and feeling connected to you all. If this story resonated with you, or if you just enjoyed seeing justice served, please consider subscribing to the Healing Drama Stories channel. Hit that like button to support the work. And if you really want to help this story reach more people who might need to hear it, please press the hype button. Your support means the world to us. Until next time, remember you define your own worth. Take care.